Grant, we've got two jobs here. Give people some takeaways on procurement strategies and make sure no one's late for happy hour. That's the last fireside. So a lot of pressure. We'll try to be on time. As Kaylee mentioned, I'm Brad Ganane. Appreciate the time here today with everyone. Joined by Grant Belden from Radix. Before we dive in, want to give you 30 seconds to share a little bit about yourself and your work at Radix.
No, I greatly appreciate it. And so for those who don't know, Radix is a company that does IT solutions globally, where they implement machine learning, artificial intelligence by connecting data to provide information. That also includes predictive analytics and predictive monitoring in supply chains and within asset-heavy businesses. I have not always been at Radix. I've got 25 years experience doing commercial management inside and outside the United States. I lived 9.5 years in Europe, managing West Africa flows for a very dynamic and fun industry of chocolate. And then came back to the United States to be in peanut and other nuts that are happening to be traded in the United States. So chocolate to nuts, right? So, but I'm very excited about the procurement topic and some of the things that I see in the marketplace.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've talked a lot today throughout the conversations about market volatility in different ways, geopolitical risks. We've talked about demand. We've talked about supply. You just heard, fraud as another thing that's driving, a lot of volatility in the markets that we all operate in. And I'm curious, how is that shaping procurement and how is that driving change and what are you guys seeing on the procurement topic in the midst of all of these volatile changes that seem to be never ending over the past 5 years or so?
I think there's a couple areas I'm going to go through. Geopolitical, we've already talked about those disruptions, tariffs, and other challenges that have taken place that everybody sees. You've got demand dynamics, capacity realignment. And then I'm going to cover some macroeconomic headwinds and labor regulatory. All these things we've talked about already today, but I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. Really, supply chain is cost optimization, resilience, and you're looking at how you're managing your business in a finer detail. If you look at companies that have gone on the cutting edge of managing costs, it's really driven by data and getting your resilience to manage the macroeconomic times. If you look at Amazon, Walmart, other companies that are so focused on their data, they can actually predict and weather some of the market dynamics that are impacting them today. That's by deep diving into what information they already own and they already have to make it at your fingertips.
Yeah, and I think as we think about procurement, I think oftentimes we can be really cost focused, and that can be, the only item at times. How have you seen, some of that shift from cost only maybe, or as, the main item to managing risk?
When I look at risk, I look at what type of scenarios are you trying to manage? And typically the tariff scenario, let's just talk about the 2020 tariffs, right? Or 2024 tariffs, 25. That came up in 2016, actually. And I remember being on a call where major companies were discussing, how do I manage that? And one of them said, I started going through scenario planning. We did scenarios on realigning our capacity per factory in 2016, and we just re-implemented those strategies. So I would highly encourage, if you aren't already, looking at your contingency planning and kind of have a moment in a boardroom somewhere to say, what are the things that could impact me? What are the things that importing could be delayed? How will I be able to manage it? Some of the cross-functional piece that people don't typically talk about in procurement is, and we actually had it at the round table, we were talking about food and beverage. How much does finance play a role in your procurement strategies? When they hear something in the freight market, do they say, why aren't your freight rates going down? What are you doing when you've got a factory, right? Like, I don't like this freight company, or I don't like this ingredient. How do you manage that? And so I would highly encourage everybody to look at that cross-functional piece to drive value. So it's just not a price discussion. You're actually capturing the full breadth of your supply chain through looking at each segment of your supply chain. And I would say the diversification of suppliers. I mean, I know as a seller to someone, you want to be the only supplier, right? I think the person who's just up here, I think his name was Danny, talked about know your partners, right? That goes the same way when you're talking about suppliers. Know your suppliers to where you have a relationship more than a transaction. When it's a transaction, it's price. When it's a relationship, you're trying to drive value. And that's a hard conversation to have over time, but you'll get there.
Yeah, and maybe to tie that back into finance too, how do you have, or how have you seen companies have that conversation and pulling finance into those discussions and, trying to drive the discussion to be more value-based versus, only a line item on a spreadsheet?
I think in all businesses, I was talking earlier to a colleague out here about how they get to their data and how do they manage it. A lot of times it's collaboration and it's KPIs. Let's face it, your KPIs are going to drive those conversations with finance. It could be as simple as load to truck ratios. It could be, if it's a transportation item, it could be your tender rejection rates as another topic, right? Sometimes when you look at ocean booking and cost savings and things like that, are the driving discussion topics. There's no finance person out there that wouldn't want to have a conversation with somebody who starts it with, I think we could make more money. Or I think we could save money. But sometimes it's hard to find that data. And so you got to collaborate. You've got to really sit down and say, this is what's impacting my job. And how can you help me get through it? Because everybody's on the same team.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you've touched on the data a few times here so far in the conversation. On the SONAR side, we sit at the crossroads of kind of the vendor or the third party data with a customer and their own internal data. And if we kind of look at data from two aspects, your own data and, external data, what are you guys seeing from companies and what's really important for them to be able to maybe first harness their own data and be able to take advantage of that, whether it's alongside of or with, third party data?
So I think this is one, depending on the business. If we work in the oil and gas industry, in the oil and gas industry have a tremendous amount of parts that are moving, so they have historians to store that data. And if I'm speaking a different language, it's okay. I was in this point about 9 months ago, where you have all this data there that they've got, and it drives value. So when the plant breaks down, well, how do they know which part, which screw they need to buy, and how does it impact their production? And if you're in manufacturing, pretty simple in that respect. You want to know that data. If you're an OEM, or let's say you're a shipper, right? And you want to know what part is going to break because it hasn't hit the life cycle, or you want to manage your repairs and maintenance better. We've worked on cases where we hook inside the equipment and we know how long it ran, what did it haul, where did it haul, what was the temperature of the fuel. But then we streamlined all the processes afterwards where nobody had to carry a piece of paper. They scanned it, invoice happened automatically, reorder happened automatically. So it's really about thinking big. There's no such thing as small plans, if you really think about it. There's no such thing as small plans. And if you think big when it comes to your business and your data and your procurement team is aligned with you on that, you've got automation, change your bid cycle. We talked about, hey, what if you have multiple bid cycles that happen for information, and have a carrier strategy, since we're talking about freight. When I was in procurement for 25 years, we always tried to leverage the price. Mm-hmm. When I got into the Southeast region and got impacted by fruit and vegetable and got impacted by carrier availability, we changed the whole mantra to what kind of a relationship do we want in the spirit of an entire season, which meant we were covering the planting, the regular time feeding our factories, to harvest time where we had peaks and troughs. We spent a tremendous amount of time having collaboration meetings to be able to drive value with the carrier. Because if you don't have the carrier that's willing to go to a latitude and longitude farm field, you're really stuck because you aren't going to be able to maximize your total supply chain.
Yeah, and something I think you mentioned a little bit earlier in this conversation, when, thinking of the topic of building resilience, and, you talked about someone running scenario planning analysis, years ago. When you think about the process of being able to do that, and as it ties to, building resilience into your network, what are some of those, maybe cornerstones or foundations that you need to have in place to be able to do that?
I think one of the things is to start early. If you're in procurement, each crop year, if you're buying a commodity or you're buying a widget, start doing those scenarios, keep that data, because what you really, the creme of the creme is a digital twin. The digital twin, being able to download all your data and have it mirror your data that's going on live, and you could do scenarios. What if we use this ingredient instead of that ingredient from two different suppliers? How does that impact production and yields? What if we use this trucking company to haul this load versus that trucking company to haul a different route? Digital twins for those, just to keep it simple, is just you take a data dump of what you have in your system, and you can run scenarios on it and populate different ways of outcomes. That's a digital twin. Everybody talks about AI. There's about 6 or 7 different types of AI, so if you think about it, if you're doing a calculation with AI, such you're doing a linear regression table, that's AI, right? It's a calculation. Or text, that you're checking for text. You could do video cameras, right? And check it that way. But when you come down to your data and scenarios, you want to have collaboration with your team. In procurement, you think you see everything. And what I found, the really mature organizations don't rely on procurement to do the scenarios. They've got the quality team, the manufacturing team, they've got finance involved. And so if you have a sales and operational planning process, use that to drive your scenarios, because then that really drives how you can look at maximizing your bottom line in business.
Yeah, and I guess I'm curious as well. Along those lines, we actually didn't have too much of our topics around AI, but before we kind of jump to key takeaways here moving forward, what are some of the low hanging fruit opportunities within procurement where you think they're just right now, it's like those are no brainers for AI to deploy? Where's the most ROI, I guess, from your perspective right now?
So when I look at AI, don't be afraid if you don't have an AI strategy. Okay, so let's say you don't have a roadmap for AI because you have antiquated systems, things that aren't linked together, and you think, okay, I can't do AI. I would encourage you to do a pilot and identify the one area that you have troubles with. Let's say if it's spare parts, because that's a driver, right? Procurement's buying spare parts, you have invested capital out there, working capital. Your finance team could get behind it to where you could start tracking your spare parts or your inventory. I would start off with that and just say slow moving inventory, fast moving inventory, things that your teams today may spend the month getting all the data on an Excel spreadsheet, going through, analyzing those details. Just take a step back and say, how can we make this done faster? And what areas are the P&L drivers? So in some companies, they're looking at it that way. The petrochemical space, we had somebody who wanted AI, and they're very mature. They wanted AI for the CEO to not get financial reports anymore, but he just wanted to have a microphone at his desk to be able to talk to the data. He wanted to be able to say, hey, how much rework did we produce last month? How many shipments didn't get shipped on time? What is our OTIF? Are we on pace with revenue to meet our P&L estimate? Right? All the questions that you have. So that their journey started with just a simple pilot, and then you can move it to a minimum viable product. All right. But I would start small if you don't already have something in place.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as I think I would say, from our perspective, in thinking about procurement strategies and, amidst all this volatility, I think data as near real time as possible is super important. especially when forecast models are difficult to have a lot of trust in right now, because there's just so much changing that's outside of, all of our control. But, I'm curious as we kind of close out our conversation here, and get ready to wrap up, what are some key takeaways that you want the audience to have as we look forward into 2026 and things that this group should be thinking about?
Well, I think from the data perspective and from procurement, let's just stick on procurement. Be willing to change. Sometimes you procure the same thing over and over again, and you just think, okay, it's a good strategy type deal. Really challenge that status quo, and you could do that with scenarios. If somebody's really frustrated about tariffs today, the corporation I was talking to in this call in 2025, he said, I'm not surprised at all. It already came up in 2016. We already did a scenario to it. So just be prepared. I will tell you, companies are going to extremes when it comes to data. There's a port today in the world that's looking at how can I hook to a vessel before it's loaded with containers and monitor the speed of that vessel so it doesn't spend carbon to race across the world to my port to sit for 5 days before I unload it. That predictive insight is going to drive ebbs and flows in the freight market that we already talked about, because somebody has that data. So predictive analytics all the time. Now, it's very easy to say it's somebody else's data, but in reality, you have your own data. So how good are you at procurement, and how good is your team at their forecast of demand? Because then you can gamify how you do running your business that way. So predictive analytics, agility in how you manage things, managing your business, and that open communication. And I think in closing, right, when I look at SONAR and I look at what you guys provide and I look at the resilience and differentiator that you provide, just like your tool, you enable people to have a different insight than they didn't have before. Radix wants to give you a different insight than what you didn't have before in the timing that you wanted it. Regardless of our two companies, if you take a step back and think, procurement, to be really good at procurement and really mature, is to try to be on the cutting edge of those decisions you need to make and to be able to collaborate with your team members. So that way you prevent shutdowns, you can take advantage of markets, and you have the data at your fingertips to be able to really drive value.
Absolutely. No, appreciate the insights. It was great, getting to be up here with you. And, if any of you guys would like to chat more with Grant, we'll see you guys at the happy hour, hopefully. Thanks for the time.